I woke up that afternoon to the sharp sound of knuckles rapping against my front door, not the polite tap of a neighbor or a delivery but a pounding rhythm that carried arrogance and authority, and as I pulled the curtain back I saw a man in a cheap polo with the letters HOA stitched crookedly across the chest, clipboard tucked under one arm, a fluorescent vest that looked like it was borrowed from a construction site, and a look on his face that screamed entitlement, and before I could even open the door he tried the handle, rattling it like he already owned the place, shouting, "HOA inspection, open up, we need access to verify code compliance," and my gut tightened, not from fear but from the insult of someone thinking they could bully me on my own property, so I stepped out onto the porch, boots striking hard on the wood planks, sun high in the sky casting sharp shadows across my yard, and I asked calmly, "Who exactly are you?" And he waved the clipboard in my face, a flimsy stack of papers with the HOA logo photocopied so many times it looked blurred, his tone rising with false authority. "We've received multiple complaints, and under HOA authority I can inspect your property right now, either you comply or face fines and removal of unpermitted structures," and I almost laughed at the absurdity because behind me stood my home, the barn I had built with my own hands, and the new workshop addition I had spent months ensuring was perfect to every regulation, stamped and signed with county permits that I myself had overseen, because what this man didn't know, what he couldn't possibly guess, was that I wasn't just another homeowner, I was the county building official, the very person who wrote, enforced, and approved the building codes he was pretending to wield against me, and as my neighbors peeked from their porches whispering about the so-called inspector, I decided to play it calm, asking, "And what's your name?" and he puffed out his chest, rattling off a title that didn't exist, demanding entry, his voice getting louder, and then he actually stepped toward the door, shoulder braced as if he might push inside, and that's when the simmering patience in my chest solidified into steel, and I held up a hand, my voice low but steady, "If you take one more step onto my threshold, you'll be facing trespassing charges, not me," and he smirked, confident in his bluff, muttering, "You think the law is on your side? The HOA runs this neighborhood," and slowly, deliberately, I reached into my back pocket, pulling out my worn leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal the official badge, the county seal gleaming in the sunlight, the weight of my office carved into every line of that insignia, and his smirk drained instantly, clipboard sagging as sweat beaded on his temple, neighbors gasping audibly at the reveal, and I leaned closer, my voice firm, every syllable striking like a gavel, "I am the county building official, the one who signs off every permit in this district. And not only do I know these codes better than anyone, I wrote half of them, so your little act of intimidation just became impersonation of authority, which is a felony," and his knees seemed to weaken as he stammered about misunderstandings, but the performance was over, the neighbors stepping closer now, one muttering, "Knew he was a fake," and I gestured to my truck parked in the driveway, radio in hand, calling dispatch to send deputies, explaining the attempted forced entry and impersonation, and as the HOA inspector tried to slip away I told him flatly, "Stay right where you are, you wanted authority, now you'll meet the real thing," and within minutes the sound of sirens grew louder, 2 black and white units pulling up with lights flashing, red and blue reflections sweeping across the siding of my house, and deputies stepped out, taking one look at the fake papers, then at my badge, and cuffed the man on the spot, his protests cut off by the metallic click of steel around his wrists, and the neighbors, who had gathered in a semicircle, whispered with relief and even quiet applause, one elderly man calling out, "About time someone stood up to these frauds," and as the deputies loaded the impersonator into the back of the cruiser, I stood tall, not gloating, not smug, just resolute, because authority isn't about show or bullying, it's about protecting people from exactly this kind of scam, and I turned to the crowd, telling them, "If anyone ever tries to threaten you with false inspections, you call me or the county first, don't let fear push you around," and their nods, their gratitude, filled the air like a release of pressure long held, and later as I walked back to my workshop, the smell of fresh wood and paint still hanging in the warm afternoon, I thought about the pounding on my door, the arrogance in his voice, and how quickly a mask of power falls apart when the real truth stands in its way, and I smiled, satisfied that justice had been served, knowing the story would echo across the neighborhood, the tale of the fake HOA inspector who thought he could force entry but instead ended up in handcuffs, exposed by the very building official who approved every permit he tried to weaponize. And as the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across my land, I felt a deep sense of peace. Because bullies can forge papers and shout threats, but they can't outlast the truth when the truth carries a badge.